The regulations as of October 1st, 2002 state that you must verify that accuracy on pressures at or above 3,000 psi to within 500 psi of whatever you're testing that day to an accuracy of 1%. On pressures under 3,000, you must verify to within 10% of whatever you're testing that day to an accuracy of 1% as well. The first step is you have your calibrated cylinder loaded into the water jacket. You have purged all the air out of that calibrated cylinder by opening up the low pressure bleed valve, turning on your water to the water jacket. Once water comes out of that bleed valve and goes up your burette that you've selected, you know that there is nothing but water left in that water jacket. Hydrotest has produced a form for the verification procedure, and this form must be kept on file. For this exercise, we're going to verify at 3,000, 4,000, and 5,000 psi. Our expected expansion reading at 3,000 is 44 cc's. At 4,000 it's 59 cc's, and at 5,000 it's 74 cc's. We got those readings from our calibration certificate. On the verification form, you want to fill out the date, the time, the serial number of the calibrated cylinder, and the operator's name. There are two ways to run the verification procedure. The first way is Chart A, where we're going to bring up a known value of our expansion, check our pressure gauge, and make sure that we're within 1% of that pressure. Chart B asks you for the pressure. We're going to go to a certain pressure, go to a expansion value, and make sure that that expansion value is in 1% of what our calibrated cylinder chart says it should be. Regardless of the method, after relieving the pressure, you must come back down to 0. Again, for this exercise, we're going to go to 3,000, 4,000, and 5,000. I will use the Chart A method first. My first expansion reading at 3,000 psi is 44 cc's. I will bring the burette board down to 44 cc's and start up the pump. When the water level reaches 44 cc's, I will then shut off the pump, slightly tap the gauge to relieve the pressure, and in this case my reading is exactly 3,000. I will write that figure down, bring the burette board down to my next reading, which is 59 cc's, start the pump, and when the water level reaches 59 cc's, slightly tap the gauge, and I should be within 1% of 4,000. In this case, I'm right at 4,000. Bring the burette board down to my next reading, which is 74.0 cc's. And when the water level reaches 74 cc's, stop the pump, slightly tap the gauge, and in this case I'm at 4,980 psi, so I do have a deviation. I'll then relieve the pressure by turning off the valve that controls water to the pump and cylinder. Slowly open up the high pressure bleed valve on the water jacket lid. Raise the burette board back up to 0. And verify that with no pressure on the system, I have come back down to 0. And I have. We now have to do a little bit of math to make sure that we're within the 1% accuracy. At 3,000 psi, we were supposed to have 44 cc's of expansion. We hit right at 3,000. Our deviation would be 0%. And that would be the same with 4,000. At 59 cc's, we should have been within 1% of 4,000. We were right at 4,000. We have 0% deviation. At 5,000, we should have been at 74 cc's. We should have been at 5,000 psi. We actually came up to 4,980. We need to figure out if we're within 1%. To do that, you take the larger number, which in this case would be 5,000, minus the smaller number, which is 4,980. Take that figure and divide it by what you should have been at, which in this case is 5,000, and times that by 100 to express it as a percentage, and we are off by 0.4%. That is well within the 1% allowable by DOT. At the last reading, you want to put in exactly what you came back to when you relieved the pressure, and in this case it was 0. And based upon our verification, on this day we would be allowed to test in a range from 3,000 psi all the way up to 5,500 psi. The next method is going to be using chart B, where we're going to bring it up to a known pressure on our pressure gauge and check the expansion value to make sure we're within 1% of that expansion. And again, our first reading is going to be at 3,000 psi. And this time, instead of looking at the water level in the burette, we're going to go right by the gauge. And at 3,000 psi, we then slide the burette board down to our eye level, and we take our reading. And in this case, I am at 43.8. And the next increment, we're going to go to 4,000 psi. And at 4,000 psi, we should be at 59 cc's. And with the gauge reading 4,000, we are at 59 cc's. And our final figure, it would be at 5,000 psi, where we should be at 74 cc's. At 5,000 psi, we are right at 74 cc's. And again, we must relieve the pressure, making sure that we come back down to 0. And as you can see, we are at 0. So in this example, our first reading was 3,000. We should have had 44 cc's of expansion. We actually came out to 43.8. We do have a deviation. Same math. We take the larger number, which is 44, minus 43.8 equals, divide that by what we should have been at, which was 44, and then times that by 100 to express it as a percentage, and we're off by 0.45, well within the 1%. Our next two readings at 4,000 and 5,000, there was no deviation, so it's 0% deviation. Therefore, again, based upon our verification procedures, we're okay to test that day from a range of 3,000 to 5,500 psi.